Hello and welcome to this video. This is not as usual a theory summary or something like that, but it is actually a recording of a conference presentation that I held in the student conference for critical love studies quite recently. It's called Representations of Love in Ammonite by Francis Lee, and it is basically linking critical love studies as an academic field and some theories about love in society to this film Ammonite from 2020. And this video is actually interesting for a wide array of audiences. So if you're a student of English, then this might be an example of how could you structure a conference paper or also term paper, because conference papers are, apart from being presented, quite similar to term papers. So it would be an example for you. Also, it's just an interesting glimpse into critical love studies, film studies, also literary theory a little bit, but also into this very one film. So basically, it shows you an analysis of a film that you maybe even have seen or want to see afterwards, and it also shows you how you can analyze something. Of course, this is pretty short, so to say, because it's a small analysis only, and it was to be a 15 minutes conference paper. I will be a bit more extensive here, but in general, that is very short. But it gives you an example, and also an example that I personally find very interesting, because that movie is not a stereotypical movie that just portrays love as the stereotype, but it actually does something else, but we'll go into that in a second. And it also is interesting for anyone who's just interested in looking into films differently, looking into films that portray love differently, and who just wants to listen to me presenting something and maybe getting one or two interesting facts out of that. So, welcome to that video, and now let's begin at the beginning and delve right into the topic. Love, so to say, is an integral part of our lives and also a performative concept. It is social, cultural, and changeable, not something universal that just happens. And popular culture, so film and books and every other kind of media, is one of the main sites of negotiating love in our present society. And at present, we also have film as a very important form thereof. Film are moreover fictional, and because of that, they blend imagination and real world knowledge, and they explore potentials and provide perspectives to a vast audience. Watching a film engages humans cognitively, and so the portrayal of love on screen provides experiences that add to our understanding of love. Love in cinema is structured by conventions, and they usually reify existing stereotypes and norms. But it is, even in film, possible to confront these stereotypes through narrative and filmic choices. And now I argue in that paper that Francis Lee's film Ammonite utilizes cinematic means that actively challenge existing conventions of love on screen. And because of that, the film opens up underexplored perspectives within the cultural perception of love and actively participates in shaping the discourse and also the practices of love. But let us first have a look into love in society and how our understanding of love comes about at all. Basically, love can, according to Michael Gratzke, be seen as a potentiality that is impossible to be grasped in its full complexity. We know the word love, but what it actually means, that doesn't derive from us knowing it straight away, but actually, and now here comes the second point, because we see love being realized all over the place. Love is realized in individual love acts, and these express the feelings of towardsness, of caring for another person to this other person. Basically, we express our feeling, express this abstract concept of love through acts, through saying I love you, or through caring for a person and actively doing something. And what I found very interesting is that Benjamin de la Pava Velez goes even further, and he says that love is understood through partially overlapping fragments, and that these derive from the perspectives that we draw from the experiences we make in social relationships, but also in media representations, even in theory. So basically, we have love portrayed in love acts, in theory, in media, and also in social relationships. And because of that, we gain, fragments of understanding love. So we see, okay, in this movie, love is understood as that. I experience this in a social relationship, so I take that fragment as well. And from these sources, we map out our understanding of love. And love also emerges in a structured way that enables shared recognitions and also normalizes love. So basically, we have norms and we have stereotypes. And right now, in our culture, we have certain, I would say, cultural structures of love. And some of them are, for example, unequal gender roles in relationships, heteronormativity, Also, privileging romantic love relationships over other forms of attachments, monogamy, and so called confluent love. Confluent love basically means that tendency to say, I enter a love relationship with another person, and we stay with that relationship, but only as long as it satisfies both of us. If we both or one of us experiences trouble with that relationship, we just stop it and do something else. That is confluent love in a nutshell. What I also think is very important for that presentation is how fiction can portray love. And here I want to argue that while non fictional works, so, well, any kind of theory and also self help books, anything that is not saying I'm fictional, they seek to tell us the truth about love. They tell us what love is about, how it works chemically and in the brain, but what I think they can't do is really grasp the complex nature of love, this elusive quality, this idea that, well, actually, the reason why we know what love is not because there is one truth, but because there are different fragments and different portrayals. And the portrayals and experiences we make with love actually shape how we see love and how we experience it. And also, well, actually, also how we then translate our understanding of love into our own love acts towards other people. Um, and I want to draw upon findings by, at one hand, Eva Horn, who is a German, well, no, she's from Vienna, I think, but she is a scholar of German studies and she works on fiction and actually on political secrets, which I find intriguing. But here I want to apply it on love. And then also Patrick Holm-Hogan, who researched on fiction and in cognitive cultural studies. So basically, how do we process fiction in our brains? Now, Eva Horn claims that fiction maintains a delicate relationship to reality because it doesn't seek to establish a truth, but instead explores plausible versions of events. Plausible versions insofar as that a story is, of course, fictional and not really true, but we understand it. And if we understand it, then it must be somehow plausible, somehow possible, somehow comprehensible for us with the means of understanding that we bring to it from our real world experiences. What we can also say is that fiction mediates between dimensions, like temporal or epistemological dimensions, and it constructs hybrid narratives that enable new perspectives. It mixes truth and imagination. It mixes past and present, for example. And we also have a range of narratives evolving around one theme, and that produces fragments of understanding that shed light on some aspects, and on the other hand, obscure others. Also interesting, non-fictional texts claim a truth, but fictional texts can actually incorporate uncertainty and contradictions as part of the narrative. So if we want to apply that to love, love is an unstable and elusive concept. It's dynamic, it's changeable, and it also depends on the contexts it exists in and also the narratives it features in. And because of that, we can actually pretty well apply Eva Horn's findings and concepts onto love. And we can see that, well, actually, if you have a discourse like the love discourse, then it is very well portrayed through this fragmentarized and also unstable understanding that we have in fiction. And something else that I think is very important here is that what Patrick Holm-Hogan found. He says that we have an absence of a, quote, special emotion system for literature, unquote. And of course, also for other works of fiction. There is just one emotion system and one way of accessing emotions, processing them. And this is what we apply to real life, and this is what we also apply to fiction. So basically, we simulate the character's experiences when we watch a film or read a book. So we engage affective and cognitive processes that are similar to real life. And because of that, we add, through reading a book, watching a movie, or whatever, we add experiential fragments of love in our appreciation. So fiction emerges as, quote, heuristic devices designed to explore what is possible, conceivable, and maybe even probable, and they shape our perceived reality. Their potential to grasp ambiguity while also maintaining this connection to reality allows for a faceted and, in consequence, more appropriate understanding of the complex nature of love through fiction. Now, let's take a look at film and how film can actually portray love very well as well. So, film utilizes narration, so the storyline, as well as specific audiovisual means of portrayal, like composition, cinematography, editing, artistic design, and some others actually. I won't go into detail about them, but if you are interested and want to know what all that means, and go to my bibliography at the end, and there is a book by Ryan and Lenos from 2020. And that book is really, really good in explaining film theory and then also film analysis, and gives you a detailed insight and also examples about all those terms. But I won't go into detail here because that would take too long. Now, we can say that the narrative, so the storyline, is the basic distinction for us between, okay, is an action a potential love act or not? Because the storyline shows us what the action means for the characters. And the filmic portrayal of these acts is very important as well, because it reveals power dynamics in the story, implies meta levels of the story, and also links the narrative that we have to filmic conventions. With regard to love, film mirrors the tendencies of society to privilege romance and heterosexuality, and also we have those conventional stereotypical issue of man as dominant and active and women as passive, subordinate. This imbalance is now directly related to the way that the film directs the viewer's gaze. And gaze is actually a term here that applies to multiple concepts, and I'll just shortly introduce three of them. One is the male gaze by Laura Mulvey, and it's, as you can see, from 1975, so it's quite old. And this is exactly that convention, to portray female characters as passive objects of erotic desire from a heterosexual male perspective. Think James Bond movies and Bond girls. Think, well, any old Hollywood film and how they portray women in, well, just a very sexualized way, and not really as agents of their story, but through a male perspective and very eroticized. We, luckily enough, have other concepts as well. For example, the tender gaze, which was theorized by Muriel Kermican. And this focuses on complex, contextualized, and multidimensional portrayals, and it works against dominant, unjust power structures. Mainly, it shows characters' reactions rather than their bodies as objects. It shows how the characters are acting in their context. It gives us glimpses of understanding that exceed this, oh, there's a body to be looked upon. And so, actually, instead of looking at the characters and, having them in a sexualized, eroticized, and objectified way, we actually access their feelings. We understand how they act on film and why they do so. So it basically, the tender gaze enables us to be empathetic towards the characters, to understand and to reflect on the portrayal. I think that's a very, very strong feature. We also have the so-called female gaze, well, actually female gazes, because the thing is that the female gaze isn't that theorized, but it ranges from reversing the male gaze by objectifying a male protagonist instead of a female one, and also reclaiming female identity, to actually just having an intradiegetic female perspective. So the camera looks through the eyes of a female protagonist at the action, so you have a female point of view. Gaze is dependent on camera angles and also on the viewer that is signified through the camera. But we also have further elements like mise-en-scene or editing, or many more that I named in the beginning, that have significant influence on the meaning of a given scene in a film. And consequently, all of these aspects, and those are really many, can have potential or are potential tools actually for an analysis of, in our case, love on film. Of course, I won't apply all of that, so there would be like dozens and dozens and dozens more possibilities of applying film theory onto Ammonite, but on the next slides, I will just go into some aspects of the portrayal of love and hopefully give you some kind of an insight into how can you actually now use the theory that I explained to map out how a film portrays love. All right, Ammonite is a film from 2020 directed by Francis Lee, and it is set in Lyme Regis in Dorset, south coast of England, around 1840. It is loosely based on the biography of the British paleontologist Mary Anning. Mary Anning is the woman with the dark brown hair, and she's portrayed by Kate Winslet. And I mean, you can see the poster there, and if you know who Kate Winslet is, you know who Mary Anning is. She's the one on the right-hand side in the big poster. And then you have Charlotte Murchison as a very important character. That's the other woman, portrayed by Saoirse Ronan. And now the plot centers on a fictional lesbian relationship between Mary Anning and Charlotte Murchison. This relationship, a romantic relationship that is actually conventional, but that is only the only thing that is conventional about that relationship, I think. It is at the center of the narrative, but it frequently intersects and it is contrasted by other forms of emotional attachments that we would either call love or are linked to love in some regard. And one of them is heterosexual attachment and marriage. And this is in the movie shown mainly through the relationship between Charlotte and her husband Roderick throughout the first 20 minutes of the film. This relationship lacks the emotional attachments typically associated with love. It is marked by patriarchal hierarchy, since Roderick assumes a dominant role and Charlotte submits to his decisions most of the time. She is introduced to the audience by him, and with the words, "My wife, Charlotte Murchison." So he actually names her relation to him, my wife, before he names her actual name. This shows this relationship, this hierarchy in the relationship. Um, she's also explained to, so basically everything we know about her in the first part of the movie is explained by men, by him mainly. She suffers from mild melancholia. She was sent to Lyme Regis for convalescence, and also she has many medical prescriptions by other men, of course. It shows her as a woman in a patriarchal society. And this is also mirrored in the way they move in space or they interact with each other. You can see in that picture there that Charlotte is walking behind Roderick. She gazes to the ground, very expressionless. She has her hands tightly clutched into each other and looks like she's moving very restrained. She also doesn't look happy, but that is also related to her relationship, but this is the case all of the time. But I think especially the movement is here very important because that is how they always move through space, how they walk around in Lyme Regis in the film. And this is also very interesting in conversations between them, where his decisions, Roderick's decisions, are expressed without any consideration of her perspective, and his speaking literally interrupts her arguments and then overrides them. He doesn't even listen to her because he only sees his own perspective. And so we do have this tendency of really a hierarchy between the two of them that is mirrored in everything. We also have physical as well as emotional distance. And for that, I want to draw upon the other scene that I have given you a picture here. And this is a scene where they go to bed together. And well, actually, the thing is, in the scene, Charlotte is already lying in bed. She looks, well, rather expressionless at Roderick, who undresses. Now imagine that, a man, and he actually gets fully naked. It is indeed something that we would assume the other way around, that a man gazes at a woman undressing. That would be the typical male gaze. This means here we have a reversal of that, in a way, a female gaze. But instead of sexualizing and eroticizing this, it remains very cold, distant, and expressionless. So we actually exhibit, or this film actually exhibits this weird tendency of gazing at someone else as an object, and really doesn't portray as very positive. So that happens, and in the end, he lies down next to her. She actually comes over to him in a way we could say like she wants to cuddle. What he says is, quote, "Now is not the right time to make another baby," unquote. Full stop. So basically, not only is sexuality, instead of being a potential love act, a, well, purely reproductive purpose between the two of them, for him at least, but also intimacy is associated only with sexuality. And they are not, so they are basically really physically and emotionally completely distant. Now, we can say that all scenes between those two partners mirror these tendencies and have this asymmetrical power structure and distance. And this, to my opinion, exhibits these oppressing structures of a patriarchal heterosexual relationship, especially if we look at the past, but of course also somehow in the present. And instead of romanticization, which happens very often, this is portrayed as a source of suffering for both partners. Because neither of them draws any satisfaction from their interaction. There's no solution for this negative situation portrayed at all. The second aspect of love that I want to focus on is motherly love or motherhood. It is, interestingly enough, mainly portrayed through its failure, because women express their attachment by grief for their deceased children. In Mary's mother Molly's case, that is the old woman that you see in the left-hand picture, the active mourning of 8 out of her 10 children constitutes her main display of love towards anyone, and it appears as the recurring ritual of washing 8 porcelain figures, that's what you can see in the picture, which she calls her babies. Charlotte similarly grieves for her child, which is implied in multiple fragments over the course of the narrative. So you have people, so we have this "not the right time to make another baby" quote. We have her talking in a delirium in a fever about not having held her child, and we also have some other scenes that imply it. So basically, over time, we realize she made that experience. And this also means that it is a recurring theme that shows her emotional attachment to a child. These portrayals are an alternative to the positive evaluation of motherhood in contemporary discourses, and they are amplified in Mary's statement that she doesn't need nor want children. Nonetheless, this portrayal establishes motherly affection as a relevant form of love for several characters. So now I didn't, yeah, sorry, I didn't change slides. So basically, slide. um, and now we come to the, well, most central portrayal of love and also the most elaborate portrayal of love, which is that of the evolving lesbian relationship between Mary and Charlotte. It challenges existing stereotypes of portraying romantic love on screen in the content based aspects of portraying lesbian romantic love, as well as care and sharing everyday tasks as essential for the relationship. Moreover, the filmic means of portraying these features as well as sexuality diverge from the conventions, and thus they open up explorative space. We can say that lesbian love marks a diversion from the convention and thus provides an alternative perspective on love's perception anyway. Now, in this film, we have Charlotte's and Mary's relationship beginning as forced togetherness because Roderick exploits Mary's financial precarity and Charlotte's submission to his decisions to basically put them up together and be like, okay, now you have to walk the beaches together because she needs that for her convalescence. She doesn't want that. And Mary must do that because otherwise she doesn't get money. And she really needs money because she's a working class person. Um, and because of that, they have a very cold dynamic towards each other. Mary expresses openly that she's not very happy about the situation, and Charlotte doesn't draw satisfaction out of that at all. But the dynamic between the two of them changes. And the moment when that happens is it's actually related to care. Because Charlotte falls ill, and we have that in the left-hand picture here. That is basically Charlotte really falling into the door when she arrives there for one other walk at the beaches with Mary, because she has a fever and she just falls there and is unconscious. And so she falls ill, and the physician decides that Mary is to perform the duties of a nurse for her. Mary is also not happy about that. But basically, these enforced acts of companionship and care, at one hand, signalize the patriarchal dynamic of the society, but they also now start to highlight how the lesbian relationship functions differently. Because instead of maintaining her coldness towards Charlotte, Mary fears for her life. And she treats Charlotte with care that enables actually now mutual feelings of pleasure. We have that portrayed in the other picture. Applying cooling rags or salve against the fever becomes a meaningful act of intimacy that signalizes both care for Charlotte on Mary's side, as well as her positive reception thereof. So you actually, if you would look into the movie now, you would have this actually as something where instead of just merely this medical procedure of we apply salve now to somebody, this is actually an aspect of intimacy in there, an aspect of it's something that Charlotte actually really likes and really feels positive with, which you can judge by her reactions. Reminder, tender gaze here, because you see her reaction and you know how she feels because her reactions are focused. And also for Mary, this is something very special and something where she is really conscious about what she's doing. And wait, here we are. So basically, we have that. And we can say that these moments function as connecting experiences for both women, which is mirrored in later displays of emotional or physical care and mutual support, especially comfort in moments of despair and emotional turmoil. And you can see that in the left-hand picture here, where basically this time it's actually Mary who is in emotional turmoil state, and it's Charlotte who before was ill, now supporting her emotionally. Another salient feature of the connection between Mary and Charlotte are shared everyday experiences, which range from preparing, sharing meals to working in the fossil shop and searching for fossils, which involves hard physical work. You can see that in the other pictures where they are just sitting at dinner, basically, or at lunch, might be either. And so basically, we can say that this establishes routines and ordinary actions, as well as care, as meaningful towards a relationship and highlights the relevance of companionship and friendship-like quality for their also romantic relationship. Another aspect that I want to focus on is mutual attraction as well as sexuality that are typically part of romantic narratives and also central means of differentiating Mary's and Charlotte's relationship from a friendship. But instead of mere eroticization, the focus herein lies on pleasurable experiences which derive from physical, but also intellectual or personality related attraction, and their fulfillment in practices. Regarding the latter form, so basically how is attraction there? The shared interest in paleontology allows for enhanced levels of interaction through the walks on the beaches and also provides a further point of connection for the two women. The effort that enables them to excavate the fossilized head of a sea lizard together marks an experience of joy and the shared achievement that results in further closeness and actually leads to their first sexual encounter. Now, let's focus on sex scenes because I think that's very important here as well. Um, so you have these attraction-based scenes where it's just pleasure together or achieving something together, and here we have one is on the photos that you have. One is here the sea lizard, which is still in the rock that they are transporting, but you see that this is a lot of effort for them, and they just share the effort and are very, very much enjoying that. And the other one is actually when they just go swimming together, and it's actually like the cheesiest moment in that whole movie, and it's not so cheesy. You don't have film music that underlines it. You just have them really as going into the water together. Charlotte is actually quite afraid of that, and so you have this trust moment, and then you also have this like little bit of sunlight, which is making it very romantic. But it's very understated compared to what you would expect from a photo like that. But now let's go into sex scenes because I think that's also very important here to focus on that a little. Um, so basically, in both sex scenes, the film has two of them. Well, it has two of them, but one is actually implied through just light from underneath a closed door. So maybe there are three sex scenes, but we only get to see two of them. Um, so two of them, the film utilizes a tender gaze and thus enables the viewer to relate to the characters' feelings empathetically rather than merely gazing at them in a manner that caters to heterosexual desire. This is achieved by close shots of the actions the characters are engaging in rather than their bodies, which highlights women as active in determining their own narrative. Furthermore, the reactions which are focused are, at one hand, the facial expressions as close shot, and on the other hand, the noise that emerges from the action is only sound files. So basically, you're very much in the moment and not like looking at that from a distance with maybe even music underneath, but really in the moment, details, close shots, reactions, and what do they do, and how does that also elicit a reaction in the people. Um, so we have their bodies as part of the action, and still, this is only their bodies portrayed in the act of mutual pleasure or asking for or signaling consensus. And so the voyeuristic potential of the camera instead allows accessing the character's feelings. The photos that I have here are, I think, paradigmatic of that. So the left-hand one is Mary gazing up to Charlotte, basically asking for, is it okay if I do that? Asking for consensus, which which Charlotte then grants her by, and that's actually the next shot, by really just herself. It's not someone who just pulls up a skirt, but Charlotte actually does that herself. So she tells basically through her actions, there's no speaking at all in those sex scenes, that she wants that. So you have this connection and this possibility to follow, okay, what do they do? Why do they do that? How do they relate to each other in a very focused manners? Also, if you have their bodies portrayed, I found that very interesting. You have nude photos of them or nude scenes, basically, but usually the body is like only there when you basically go from their face to what they do on other parts of the body. So basically, it is just there, but it's not really focused. Or you actually have hands or other body parts basically on very, I would say, sensitive body parts, which means that you don't just get to see nipples or so, but it's rather interrupted. And it also shows, okay, how is that related to what they just do there? So this really, of course, it is very explicit. It's explicit sex, but it is not showing sex as, oh, this is very erotic and very sexual, and now this is just for the camera, but it's just for themselves, really. And I think an important part thereof is that, oh, well, no, that is actually also sex parts. Do we have, yeah, here we actually see how hands feature very, very prominently with regard to, okay, that is what they do rather than this is something that is just there for the camera. And at the end of each of the sex scenes, another I find very interesting, we have a focus on something else. The first one is the focus on the lizard head that is now excavated, and you can see it there in the picture. And in the other scene, you have candles in focus. And so basically, it doesn't extend the sex scene like forever and ever, but it basically, in the end, the camera draws away. It grants them, in a way, privacy. And because of that, we can also say, well, yes, we can access their feelings, but we're not supposed to just look at them in a, well, objectified manner, because it's not about how we see that, but it's about what they experience. And I think that's very important. Mm, what we thus can say about this relationship is that it diverges significantly from the dynamics of heterosexuality, and it avoids the aforementioned asymmetrical stereotypes that are associated with romantic films very much. Apart from their outlooks that demarcate both as a women of their time, neither partner is portrayed as behaving typically feminine or masculine or assumes a dominant role in the relationship, but both take first steps or engage in love acts towards each other. Moreover, sexuality functions as climax of their relationship, but it is interrelated with mutual care and attraction regarding their interests and personalities. So basically, yes, sex is important, but sex is not the only thing that establishes their relationship. But the relationship happened, or it was established way before, and now all the aspects that we noticed: care, mutual support, everyday actions, shared interests, attraction, both on physical as well as intellectual, personality based aspects, and then also sex, all of them, and this is 6 aspects now, is very important. Now, if we want to discuss that in a little more detail with regard to the theories we talked about before, we can say that Ammonite portrays different emotional attachments as eliciting different levels of reciprocity and satisfaction for the people involved. Despite the positivity and centrality of Mary's and Charlotte's romantic attachment, it manifests only one aspect of love relationship portrayed in the movie, and is, regarding to the filmic means employed in individual shots, not shown with more attention to detail than, for example, the recurring theme of motherly attachment or the dynamic between the heterosexual partners. So all love acts and all potential love acts and emotional attachments are shown with great detail and very much care in the movie. And because of that, we can access the feelings. That is super important here. Um, mm, Moreover, we can say that other human attachments, but this romantic love, remain relevant for these people, and they also appear recurringly, so they are marked out as very important as well. Thus, Ammonite manages to draw upon several discourses of different forms of love and provides in itself a faceted understanding of the potentialities of love. The way in which these attachments are enacted challenge heterosexual stereotypes, and they exhibit patriarchy as a source of suffering, foreground queer love as more equal and satisfactory, and establish grief, ordinary life, and care as essential aspects within love relationships. The film focuses on women and avoids stereotypical and objectified portrayals by implementing a very prominent tender gaze, as well as reversing the male gaze as female gaze on a male body without eroticization. Instead of displaying bodies to be gazed upon, the filming of sexual encounters focus on activities and reactions, thus creating insight into the character's emotions. And thus, the explicit portrayal of sex inspires empathy and also exemplifies a tender gaze. The film also contributes to something that Ana Cavallo calls queer archaeology. The potential of fiction to mediate between temporal as well as epistemological dimensions here allows for creating a hybrid image. Instead of examining the past according to the presently known documentary record of cultural texts, so what is really left over through time, fiction establishes a past that, quote, does look back, informing the present and establishing a trans-temporal dialogue, unquote. The unresolved issues that we have in the film, for example, regarding silencing women or the lack of representing and transmitting queer narratives, allow for a reflection of past problems and also, quote, how old problems are still very much alive, unquote, in the present. Consequently, the film creates a potential version, a facet of the past that explores alternatives to the dominant discourses of both past and present. In conclusion, Ammonite's filming portrayal adds an array of fragments to the perception of love within the audience's minds, and in consequence to the social appreciation of love. This is achieved by focusing on a lesbian romantic relationship where women actively determine their own narrative rather than being the passive object of heteronormative male desire. While centering on a romantic relationship, other forms of attachment are portrayed as important for the protagonists, and their emotional meaning is explored, and so care, ordinary experiences, and grief become central aspects of love in relationships. Thereby, Ammonite 2020 depicts various forms of love on screen, actively challenges existing conventions of portrayal, and allows for a critical exploration and more nuanced understanding of love's possibility. It thus exemplifies film as a negotiation space for the potentialities of love that feeds into the discourses about both past and present, as well as portraying, imagining, and consequently also experiencing love. Now, with that, I end my presentation. I'm sorry that it took so long because actually it was designed as a 15 minutes presentation, but if I not don't just read my paper but actually explain something about it as well, then that takes more time. And I hope that also by not speaking too fast, I gave you a very comprehensible version of that presentation. Now, here is my bibliography, actually the first page thereof. No, it's on that page. Here on that page, yeah, exactly. Here the previous to last one is Michael Ryan and Melissa Lenos, and that is this introduction to film analysis that I mentioned over the course of the presentation, and I think it's very good. So if you go into film analysis in cultural studies or literary studies at some point, maybe that is a very, very important source to look into, because it really explains in great detail how you can do so and how you can also use different parts of a film to analyze meaning. And with that, I would say thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, put them into the comments, or if you have my email address, just send me an email. And yes, I hope that you could take something away from that presentation for yourselves as well.